In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm Mark Zaccaria.
I'm April Giruso. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. Are you a fan of the fun phrase, what goes around comes around? Do you have this feeling in the pit of your stomach that Republicans and Democrats are different in this state? Have you ever wondered whether the term judicial innovation is considered an oxymoron down at the Attorney General's office? Have you ever questioned whether you are the only taxpayer in the Ocean State to pay those taxes on time? Well, if so, have we got some validation for you on this week's show? We'll cover all of that and more this week on Common Sense. We will also have our regular in-depth interview courtesy of State Representative Patricia Morgan. This week, Pat's special guest is former State Rep. Nick Gorham. He'll bring some historical perspective to the ethics drama that's been consuming all the oxygen on Smith Hill recently. Between segments of that interview, Mark and I will reappear and ask, and then answer, our rhetorical question of record, are you kidding me? Then we'll wrap up with commentary from Jeff Richard. This week, Jeff muses on the subject of cruises. To get all this started, though, let's have some analysis of some of the top news stories in Rhode Island this week. Mark?
Thanks, April. Last week, we saw acknowledgement on the part of newly minted Republican State Rep. Karen McBeth of the difficulties she faces operating under her new flag. Ms. McBeth announced that she would not be a candidate for Rhode Island's 1st District seat in the U.S. Congress after all. To the surprise of very few, she noted the extreme difficulty she now faces in raising the kind of campaign funds it will require. We here at Common Sense respect her decision and hope she will reconsider continuing to do the work of the people in State District 52. McBeth first considered switching party affiliations for 2 reasons. First was easy. She found herself more naturally aligned with the Republican philosophical goal of allowing individuals to make their own way through a life that government controlled only insofar as it prevented intimidation of its citizens. Democrats come to their big government position altruistically enough. They attempt to use the size and organizational bulk of government to directly assist citizens. It's a great idea, except that it requires a big bureaucracy to do that work, and that means lots and lots of tax dollars to pay them all, as well as to cover the costs of all that direct assistance. We can argue the pros and cons of the 2 approaches later. There's a second, more significant reason for McBeth's switch, though. Here in the Ocean State, the dominance of the Democrats for 80 years or more now has led to an impenetrable fortress of incumbency. That walled citadel permits all who dwell within to ignore the very folks they got into politics to help. That disconnect between political leaders and their constituents has brought us behaviors such as the 38 Studios mess, the attempt to pick our pockets for a new Pawsox Stadium, and now truck tolling for whatever it is they plan for the money this week. Individuals such as John Salona, Gordon Fox, and Ray Gallison come to mind as poster children for using legislative power for personal gain. Karen McBeth may have felt some distaste for all of that personal gain, but the thing she missed was how much it wraps up every possible campaign dollar in Rhode Island. She missed it until last week, that is. She had high hopes for her congressional campaign until she started checking in with her traditional sources of donations. They hadn't actually dried up all of a sudden just because she's now with the GOP. They'd gone away because she was no longer in a position to add anything to those donors' rice bowls. Sorry, folks, that's it. Because our politics has become all about personal gain, we have witnessed the dismantling of a state political system that was once an example for the nation. Remember the part about declaring independence from England 2 months before the Slowpokes? To regain that position, which is all mapped out for us in our Constitution, we have to vote in some new legislators and then let them know that their tenure is based on the will of the people, not that of the unions and insider financiers. Oh, and we have to look at someone like Karen McBeth as the kind of real representative of the people who we have to retain. April?
Thanks, Mark. A package of bills has recently garnered general praise for its intention to streamline how the state handles probation, but the Attorney General's office warned that they will challenge the provisions if passed. As part of this proposed legislation, the state Superior Court would set up a diversion program where judges could, if a defendant qualified, craft a community service or treatment sentence instead of prison. Kilmartin's office is concerned that such a program would violate our state's constitution by transferring authority to prosecute felonies from his office to the courts. The head of the Attorney General's Criminal Division, Stacey Veroni, stated that it would be their obligation to challenge if the legislation passes. Michael DeLauro, the legislative liaison for the state's public defenders, had a different interpretation, though. He said that no one raised separation of powers concerns when similar diversion programs were constructed to face drug, weapons, or veteran courts. DeLauro also said that this is legislation that will allow the Superior Court to create and run a program, and it is silly to think the Attorney General will not have an active role in that, and he even continued to state, according to the Providence Journal, that in this instance, separation of powers is a red herring. In this legislation, defendants will be evaluated before they are arraigned and before they go on probation to ensure no one truly dangerous slips through the cracks. In this way, treatment can be better determined for those who need it. The Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence agrees with the legislation, saying that states where similar screening policies have been adopted have seen the number of domestic homicides sharply drop. Now, the Attorney General's office concedes that prosecutors would much prefer to have non-prison alternatives, and I'm sure our state budget would prefer that too. But Veroni argues that this legislation will accomplish little because it does not account for the funding of facilities and programs to which the defendants could be diverted. She stands by the standard of probation which has been in place for years, even though State Senator Stephen Archambault, a former Jamestown police officer, calls the standard vague, and it results in too many people being declared probation violators. Maybe he's trying to try something new, Attorney General Kilmartin. Potentially reduce prison population, provide treatment that's going to prevent recidivism much better than incarceration, and maybe even save the taxpayers some money. What's unconstitutional about that? Mark?
Thanks again, April. Last week, Kathy Gregg, writing in Projo, reported on a major policy shift in the way that Senate Majority Leader John DeSimone handles his personal finances. Gregg flatly stated that usually reliable sources within the DeSimone household had promised that the Majority Leader would henceforth pay his City of Providence quarterly property taxes on time. Her report made it seem like a triumph of modern accounting practice. Sadly, maybe it was. If the senator is as good as his word, however, he will no longer wait until the city convenes an auctioneer and a bevy of bidders in his front door to commence a tax sale before writing that pesky check. We laugh when such hubris is exposed, but do you see what it says about the fortress of incumbency I mentioned at the top of this segment? No one should be surprised that a person in Senator DeSimone's position would willfully ignore his local obligations as a citizen. Do you know why he and all his friends act that way? Because they can. April?
Succinctly put, Mark. In just a moment, we will go to the first segment of Representative Pat Morgan's interview with Nick Gorham. Before we do, though, I think I feel a question coming on. I think someone is about to voice the timeless query. Are you kidding me? A session was held where taxpayers could vocalize their desire to put more power in Governor Raimondo's hands. Pause. Breathe. I know I worded that in such a way that it might make you go from 0 to angry in record time, but I promise, this is actually a good thing. Are you kidding me? It's a good thing because we are not talking about Governor Raimondo in particular. We are talking about the governor's office gaining a line item veto, which would take some power away from the other lawmakers. At the forum, a Providence resident said that we need a way to shine more light because clearly there's too much darkness going on at the State House. After all of the political turmoil we have been through in the last few weeks, let alone years, how can you not agree? A line item veto authority would give the governor the power to single out spending items to reject, instead of being forced to accept or reject the budget as a whole. Former gubernatorial candidate Ken Block is leading the charge and has even spoken to Common Sense about this topic before. He claims that the veto helps control spending and provides better transparency. He told NBC 10 News that it's something that has been proven to help states control spending to get better transparency in budgets, and most importantly, to balance power between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Governor Raimondo supports the initiative as well and pointed to recent State House scandals to support the veto. She wants to take action to restore the people's confidence in the government, which I agree we absolutely need to do. She calls the line item veto another layer of accountability the taxpayers deserve. House Speaker Mattiello wouldn't say one way or another how he feels about the veto, but told NBC 10 that the government in the state works with the current power structure. More specifically, he stated that the balance works. Well, government works isn't really good enough. Obviously, the government is in working order. We haven't descended into anarchy yet, and we're not going to see Mattiello and Block enter the Thunderdome anytime soon. We need the government to work well. NBC 10 reminded Mattiello that many people, maybe like myself, disagree with him. So then Mattiello defended his statement, saying what I'm suggesting it works. Not that it works perfectly, and not that there haven't been missteps. But the actual government is functional. Again, not good enough. It's a given that the government operates, and maybe perfect is too lofty of a goal, but working well isn't that out of reach. So what does he continue to say? The actual government is functional. It works very well. We can do big things, so you have to be careful at disrupting that. You literally just contradicted yourself. By calling the government merely functional and admitting that missteps have been made, then it actually doesn't work well, and your constituents don't agree with you. So what's happening? Maybe we want something that disrupts the current legislators. Maybe we want to be able to avoid political scandals. Maybe we want a government that is better than just functional. And maybe we want people in the government to not contradict themselves in a single interview. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Nick Gorham, he's a former state representative from Western Coventry and Foster.
And Gloucester.
Yes. And an attorney.
Yes.
And also a gentleman who, not too long ago, worked really hard to get separation of powers passed for Rhode Island. So he's been in the tough battles and won.
Well, right, yeah.
All right, and won.
People won. The people won.
The people won on that one.
Yeah.
That was a while back.
Yeah, that was 2004 that separation of powers went on the ballot. It passed by more than 70% once the voters were given a chance to vote on it.
Once they were given a chance, but it took forever and so much effort to get it on the ballot.
Yes.
Yeah, it shouldn't really take that long or be that hard to get good government in Rhode Island.
Shouldn't. But you do have to fight for it. There's no question about it. But I really believe perseverance is the name of the game, and it looks like, right now, Pat, there are some really good opportunities for the people of Rhode Island to get some profound change in the Constitution and in general.
Yeah, it only takes them getting engaged, right?
That's right.
They have to step up and get on Facebook and do the emails and the phone calls and buttonhole their representative and say they want it. It's something that when you did the separation of powers, I know there started to become a drumbeat in the community, and finally the Democrat leaders gave up.
Yes, they
surrendered.
Yes, with any type of change in Rhode Island. I've lived in Rhode Island all my life. I'm 54 years old. I've been watching politics for a little while in this state, and my observation is that there just comes this point where there's a critical mass where the people have just had enough, and it usually follows a crisis or an indictment or something like that, and people finally start getting behind a reform movement that matters. And I think we're at that point right now, quite frankly, after all the news about Gallison and all of his misdeeds with legislative grants and just legislative grants in general. And just the missteps that I think have been made by the governor's administration and the House Speaker. I think people really are suspect of their government, and they want to improve it. They want to see action.
They want to see action. They want it to be in their best interest, finally.
Yes.
Right? They've been kind of being taken advantage of for far too long. So I think they're just getting tired of it.
Yes.
Kind of bumping along at the bottom and paying through the teeth for it.
Yes. A lot of people who I have known a long time who are typically apolitical, believe it or not, I know a lot of people who are apolitical, but really they seem more engaged than ever. And that's just my own anecdotal observation, but it strikes me. People are really fed up in this state. And if you just listen to conversations around town and things like that, people, they really want to see change in Rhode Island, and they should. The state is it's not well run. It's a great place, it's a beautiful place, but it can be so much better if we just had a good government.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put a plug in here. One of the most effective tools for changing the way Rhode Island is coming up in November.
Well, it looks that way, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about the election.
I'm talking
yes.
about the election.
Well, that's certainly coming up in November.
Right, and right now is a time when good people who want to see something different happening in their communities or the state, they need to step forward and run as candidates, quite frankly.
Yes.
Put your name out there. There will be help for them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But unless you get like-minded people elected and good people who focus on the common good, it's not going to change.
No. One thing that is for certain, I spent 10 years in the House, like you mentioned. One thing it really struck me as soon as I became a member of the House, the power in Rhode Island is in the General Assembly. If you're unhappy with your form of government or just the way things are being run in this state in general, the place to change it is the General Assembly. There's just no question about it.
Yep.
If you look at our Constitution, if you see the way the laws are made, if you see who's really running your town, it's the General Assembly. Even if you're not happy with with all the mandates that are imposed on towns or just in general, government in general in Rhode Island, run for the General Assembly if you want to see change.
Run for the General Assembly. We pass so many laws that affect the municipalities and their ability to manage their budgets. If you're upset about property taxes, come to the General Assembly. You can help us there. But let's move on.
Sure.
We are looking at some ethics legislation.
Yes.
We have an ethics commission. Why do we need ethics legislation?
Well, there was a Supreme Court decision just a few years ago that said that members of the General Assembly are not subject to the Ethics Commission's edicts, rules, and regulations. They're not subject to the laws, in other words, of the Ethics Commission, which came as a shock to a lot of people because I think most people understood and believed that when that was added to the Constitution, the Ethics Commission, after the 1986 Constitutional Convention, the last one that we had, I think a lot of people believed that legislators were subject to the Ethics
And
Commission.
should be.
And should be. But the Supreme Court kind of shocked everyone when they said, no, they're not, because of the speech and debate clause, which is really a clause that just says the things you do as a legislator cannot, on the floor of the House and so forth, can't be prosecuted or questioned. So
that means that if you vote for something that benefits you or advocate for something that benefits you personally, it's okay.
Well, no, it's not okay. It's not okay at all. And there are criminal laws.
But it's not subject to ethics commission.
Yeah, there are criminal laws that someone would violate if they start enriching themselves as a legislator. But the fact is, Pat, that the ethics laws don't apply to legislators. That's what the debate has been about ever since the Supreme Court made that decision I just talked about.
Okay.
And that's what we need to fix with a constitutional amendment.
Okay, and there was a whole spate of ethics commission rulings, I guess back in when Billy Irons was there.
Yes.
And that kind of was why this was taken away from the Ethics Commission. There was more than Bill Irons. There was Martineau, who went to prison, and John Salona went to prison, and there were a couple of others, it seems to me. I don't have all their names down.
Quite a parade.
It was a parade of people who
Yes.
were using their leadership positions or their elected positions to sidestep the Ethics Commission's authority.
Right.
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 And so Bill Irons, do you remember what the charges were against him?
I don't specifically remember. I just I know that he immediately resigned abruptly when he was president of the Senate, right around the time of the Salona indictment and so forth. Senator Salona, who was indicted. And he challenged
He fought it.
what they call the jurisdiction, which is a fancy way of saying the power of the Ethics Commission to fine and otherwise regulate the behavior of legislators from doing things like enriching themselves as a legislator in the way that they vote. And like I said, to everyone's great surprise, when Senator Irons took that all the way to the Supreme Court, he had been charged with a number of transgressions where the Ethics Commission alleged you have enriched yourself in some pecuniary way. When he took it all the way to the Supreme Court agreed with Irons, who said, I'm not subject to the Ethics Commission. I don't have to do what they tell me to do. Their edicts do not apply to me. The Supreme Court said, you're right.
Well, I don't agree. And we're going to talk about that when we just come back.
For centuries, the ancient European breweries in Germany, Belgium, and England have operated tap rooms to make their wares available to all those who might become their customers. Recently, Representative Michael Moran of Woonsocket introduced a bill to open up that option a bit for the growing number of craft breweries here in Rhode Island. Sounds good? Think it'll happen? Are you kidding me? Okay, perhaps I shouldn't be so cynical. After all, there will be limits of around 2 cases of direct beer sales per transaction. Wholesale beer distributors and retailers here shouldn't regard that as competition, should they? Well, writing in the Providence Journal, Patrick Anderson notes that the bill may actually have already run afoul of these very groups. The traditional distribution channel for beer argues that keeping it in the loop helps preserve jobs for Rhode Islanders. And sure, it also helps preserve the monopoly that they have on what you can buy and what you must pay for it when it's time to toast the setting of the sun. The explosion of new brands of beer and ale promise a diverse palette from which Rhode Islanders can choose. Each new enterprise that's formed to approach brewing as an art begins its life with no contract for indentured servitude to the 2 distributors allowed to operate here. Those traditional distributors are insiders and union guys. Of course they oppose the bill. There's no way they want to have to compete in a marketplace where each new participant takes yet another slice of their existing market share. Ouch. I mean, why do you think there's no companion bill in the Senate? Nor is there likely to be. From the perspective of the traditional business model, Rep. Moran has had his fun, and it's now time to get back to the business of channeling the profits from all beer sales through the pockets that have always been their home. In other words, maybe I should be so cynical. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today as my guest Nick Gorham, a lawyer, a freedom fighter, patriot, and a former representative.
Thank you, yes.
Thanks for coming. Thanks again for coming. We were just talking about kind of the genesis of why the Ethics Commission's authority over the legislature was diminished.
Yes.
And basically, it came from Bill, then he was the Senate president at the time,
Yes.
Bill Irons.
Yes.
Who was allegedly or accused of using his power to pass laws that benefited his
Him.
insurance clients or himself.
Yes.
Or kind of through a long way.
Yes.
He fought it. The Supreme Court agreed with him and stripped the Ethics Commission of its power to have any jurisdiction or authority over.
Yeah. Well, I think it's
Reps,
important to point out that the
senators.
Supreme Court relied on a certain clause in the Constitution that says that legislators can't be questioned for the way, for voting, for the way they vote. It's called the Speech and Debate Clause. So anything they say on the floor of the House or Senate and the way they vote cannot be questioned by anyone.
Well, and I kind of see that, quite
Unless it's
frankly.
criminal. Unless
Yeah,
it's criminal.
okay,
That's
so-
different. But
So sometimes you get, I mean, if I got up and I voted some way because I thought it was the best thing for my constituents, I wouldn't want them to sue me for that. But it goes deeper than that, right? It only comes into play if we use our power
yes.
to make ourselves, to help ourselves financially or in
benefit
some other way,
ourselves.
to benefit ourselves.
Yes, yes. And, there are some ethics transgressions that are also crimes. but not every ethics transgression is a crime. The Supreme Court never said that criminal activity was okay.
Right.
They simply said the transgression of the ethics laws is not something that the Ethics Commission can prosecute against legislators.
Okay, all right, so now we come up in the good government groups, have said, no, wait a minute, Supreme Court, we do want to have legislators in the General Assembly subject to this. By
Yes.
the way, there's still people at the town council level, the school committee level, they're still subject to this, correct?
Oh, yes, everyone else in the state, town council, zoning board members, anyone in government having any official capacity at all, even at the town level, the fire district level, you name it, they're subject and have always been subject to the ethics laws. It's only legislators, whom I believe were the motivating reason for the passage of the ethics laws,
Sure.
who are ironically not subject to it by this Supreme Court decision. So we have the task now as a people in this state, if we want the legislators to become subject to the Ethics Commission, we have to persuade the legislature to make themselves subject to something that they probably don't want to be subject to, because they don't want anyone looking over their back a lot of the time. I think they feel like they have enough oversight by having elections every 2 years. But the fact is, everyone else is subject to the ethics laws.
Everybody else is subject
Why
to it.
not the General Assembly?
Sure, and it should be just part of our conduct. If really having somebody look over our shoulder shouldn't scare anybody if they're serving.
Right. If you're doing a good job,
And you're doing it the right way for
Yeah.
other people's benefit, not your
Yeah.
own, you're fine.
I also think that just the fact that you are subject to the ethics laws. When I was in the General Assembly for 10 years, every one of the 10 years I was there, the Ethics Commission had authority over legislators, because I left before the Supreme Court came out with this
Right.
decision. And I think it just makes you think about things a little more when you undertake to do something. Gee, am I complying with every single thing that I'm supposed to comply with? Am I doing anything that the Ethics Commission, not just my constituents, but that the Ethics Commission might think that isn't appropriate? I don't think it...
And it's fairly, not routine, but we do have legislators who get up from time to time and say, you know, I have a relationship here, I'm
Right.
going to recuse myself from this vote.
Right.
So that they don't have that, they don't have the problem.
Well, to me, it's really just a fairness argument. Everyone else in the state who's in any public office, including the governor and the general officers, Secretary of State, Attorney General, Treasurer, they're subject to the ethics laws, just like all town council members, zoning board members. It's only the General Assembly. It's not fair. You know,
Well,
that's
it's
the most basic reason, I think, that this amendment needs to be made. It's just not fair.
And they do, the Ethics Commission actually does a training every year to remind people of how far they can go, what they shouldn't be doing, what it's okay to do. That actually, like you say, it's just that extra reminder, listen, if a piece of legislation comes before you and you realize that this might affect you, your clients, anything like that, step back from it,
Right.
right? Don't get involved with it.
Keeps you thinking. There's nothing wrong with making sure that legislators keep thinking about the things they're doing when they're up there, even in the context of ethics. I don't see the harm in that.
No, there is no harm in it.
So-
It worked before. The
Yeah.
funny thing is, it really did work before.
Right.
Why wouldn't it continue to work?
I think it would continue.
Yeah, I think
mean,
it would
you know,
too.
Yeah.
But so there have been some hearings, and you went to some of them.
I went to one the other night and testified on one of the proposals, actually two of the proposals that have been made to restore Ethics Commission power over General Assembly members. I testified before the Judiciary Committee just the other night. It was the first time I've been back to testify in the House since I left.
Yeah, been a
So-
while.
Well, there was something that I saw that I really didn't like in this this so-called ethics law that the Speaker put forward, Speaker Mattiello, and that is the blackout period.
Okay, explain the blackout period for folks.
Well, the blackout period is in the constitutional amendment that Speaker Mattiello has proposed to be placed on the ballot to be considered and voted upon by the electorate. That's us, the voters of Rhode Island.
Yep, yeah, this will go on a ballot so that
Yes.
we get to vote.
Speaker Mattiello's proposal restores Ethics Commission authority over General Assembly members with one major loophole, and that is the blackout period. The blackout period says nobody can file an ethics complaint or even give information to the Ethics Commission for it to prosecute against a legislator or anybody from the time you file to run for office until the election. And my point is, what more time is more important to raise the profile of ethics than the time when we, the voters, are considering whether to elect someone? Now, they say there's an avalanche of frivolous complaints during that period. The data doesn't support that. There are more complaints during that period, but that's because people are focusing more on what their legislators do, typically, when there is an election. So
All right.
the blackout period is just a terrible idea.
Okay, and we're going to stop it with that definitive statement, and we'll be right back.
Attack mailings have been unleashed against select state lawmakers who voted for truck tolls. Democratic Party Chairman Joseph McNamara has lashed out, calling such groups behind the mailer shady, underhanded, and conservative. Are you kidding me? McNamara believes that dastardly conservative groups have disgustingly mailed such flyers without reporting to the Board of Elections, and even hypothesized that these mailings were funded by Wall Street cronies and out-of-state Republican billionaires like the Koch brothers in an effort to buy elections. Honey, if Rhode Island Republicans had that kind of muscle in their corner, they wouldn't be worrying about stamping a handful of letters. Do you listen to yourself? I'm guessing if you are a true fan of the program, you'll know why we are involved in all of this. Because one of these shadowy, demonic conservative groups mentioned by McNamara was the Gaspee Project, our mothership, if you will. The Gaspee Project is a non-election and non-campaign activity that does not require financial reporting to the State Board of Elections because it is a separate entity that is free as a 501c4, according to Michael Stenhouse, CEO of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. The purpose of the Gaspee Project is to hold lawmakers accountable for their votes, and it is a home for a number of single-issue advocacy groups who do not feel represented by the established chambers of commerce. Justin Katz of the Ocean State Current brings up probably the most important part about McNamara's disgust. The flyers constitute free speech without government regulation. That's why I'm asking you to rethink your words, sir. I may not necessarily agree with everything about these flyers, but I fully support an advocacy group's right to advertise their beliefs. And maybe next time you get major backlash over an upcoming vote, you take it into consideration. Are you willing to do that? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Nick Gorham, a former representative from Foster, Gloucester, and West Coventry,
Yes.
Western Coventry,
Yes.
who fought really hard when he was a representative to bring about the very good reform of a separation of powers.
Yes.
And now he's kind of joining the battle a little bit for ethics reform. You had mentioned, we were talking about the blackout period.
Yes.
Which in the speaker's version of ethics, of the ethics law,
Yes.
would run from June to November,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So we're talking about more than 100 days.
Under that law, even if even if the people approve Speaker Mattiello's proposal to amend the Constitution, that is, to restore Ethics Commission power over legislators, no one could file a complaint against a legislator or anyone else, town council members, nobody who is running for office, for public office. You couldn't file a complaint against any of them between the filing deadline in June and the election in November. It's almost a 4-month period.
4-month period, over 120 days. It's a long time.
It's a long time, and it would it would deprive the Ethics Commission of its ability to do its job during the most important
They'd
time.
be sitting there twiddling their thumbs, right?
And I want to say one other thing about the Speaker's proposal. First, he is trying to restore Ethics Commission authority over legislators. I give him a point for that. That's okay.
Yep.
That's good. That's good.
right.
But I didn't hear in the last 4 years or so that we've been debating the Ethics Commission's authority over legislators, or lack of it. I never heard anyone clamoring for a blackout period.
No.
It never even came up. And then
No.
suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, when the Speaker put this idea forward, suddenly he posited that there was this huge problem
Yeah.
with frivolous complaints. I want to tell you a little more about the so-called problem with
Okay.
frivolous complaints. When I was in the House, every single year, the Democrat majority would propose a bill that required the Ethics Commission to fine people who filed complaints that the Ethics Commission deemed frivolous.
Frivolous,
Okay?
okay.
That were dismissed and had no merit. And that's what presumably, that's what Speaker Mattiello is talking about, those same types of complaints. Every single year that that bill to fine people for frivolous complaints came up, the ACLU would come and testify, along with a lot of other people who really want to protect the First Amendment,
Sure.
that this will have a chilling effect on
Right.
people filing complaints, because you could be fined.
Well,
you could be
and
fined,
often
and
there is an indication that something is amiss. But to get down to the documents and get all of the information, you'd have to have a subpoena or something,
Right.
right? It's really
Right.
difficult, especially, I would say, in this administration,
So-
just for my getting that APRA request out, which is the access to public records.
Right.
So a person might have an indication that something is amiss, that
Right.
a legislator or somebody, elected official, is doing something that might be questionable, but can't get at all of the information. They
Right.
still should be allowed to bring it to the Ethics Commission and say, can you get the information
Right.
and check this out?
right. Now, every year
Not being frivolous about it, but because they have a real serious concern.
right. Well, here's what happened with those bills that were proposed to
Yep.
fine people for frivolous complaints. Every year, they were defeated.
Defeated.
The ACLU and many other people testified this is going to chill people away from ever filing ethics
Sure.
complaints. Look at what we're doing now. We're solving that same problem, if there is a problem, and I doubt there really is a problem with frivolous complaints, but just supposing there is, what are we doing? Instead of having fines now, the remedy
We're
is,
just saying you
instead of
can't.
chilling speech, we're deep freezing it with this blackout period. There's no sunshine, there's no one who can file a complaint, and I just think it's irresponsible for the House to put that on the ballot. If they want that in the Constitution, a blackout period, let them put it as a separate question.
Well, the Ethics Commission themselves are saying, listen, don't do this.
Yes.
We can handle it internally with
Yes.
our regulations.
The testimony,
Right?
yes,
Yeah.
the testimony
They
from
said,
the...
don't put it in the Constitution. You put it in the Constitution, it's really hard to change.
That's right.
But we can handle it internally to take care of the frivolous complaints.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I don't know of very many situations where these frivolous complaints ever affected the outcome of an election. When I was testifying before Judiciary, I just asked the members of the Judiciary Committee, are you familiar with a situation where a so-called frivolous complaint really had a profound outcome on an election? And they all, no one could think
I
of
mean,
one.
it could happen. It could happen, but if the Ethics Commission themselves says, we can handle it internally.
Right.
Right? We can write regulations
Right.
around it. I mean, I'm always aware of the Friday night specials, you know, those that
Right.
the Friday before
But-
the election, the postcard
but-
comes in the mail that you as a candidate can't refute. There's not enough time. But the Ethics Commission
But-
could deal with that. They
but
don't
that-
have to.
You're right. You're right. But that makes yet another good point about this this so-called blackout, the period where we're going to prevent so-called frivolous complaints. Look, nothing that we put in the Constitution can ever stop people from exercising their First Amendment rights the night before the election, you know, the Sunday night special where they leaflet an
Yeah.
entire neighborhood, that's going to take place anyway.
Anyway,
no matter
it
what
does
we do.
every election.
And frankly, I think that is far more effective in winning or losing an election than is some ethics complaint that has to be scrutinized by the commission.
Let me ask you this. It was my understanding that there are some states that have blackout periods, but they're very short.
Yeah,
Is that right? Did you hear that in the testimony?
I believe that the other states, and there aren't that
It's
many.
not 120 days.
No.
It's like
And
30 days or something.
It's much shorter, but I think the best point is the one made by the Ethics Commission. This is something that simply doesn't belong in the Constitution. You know, our Constitution right now protects people's rights to exercise their right to petition for their grievances, to exercise free speech. We're taking all of that with this blackout, throwing it right out the window.
Well, at least,
it's a
at least
really-
for 4 months, you're not allowed to
Yeah.
have those rights. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should call it the Black Eye Amendment. I mean, it really is a bad, it's going to put a black eye on our Constitution. And we really, I think the people of the state deserve something better to vote on.
Now, Common Cause has always been in the forefront. They helped you with
Yes.
separation of powers. What did
Yes.
they think about the blackout period?
Testified against it.
They did testify
Well,
against it.
they acknowledged that there can be a problem there, but they, like the Ethics Commission, advocated to keep it out of the Constitution. In other words, don't put it on the ballot as a question. Just put the question of the people, do you want legislators subject to the Ethics Commission?
Period.
And then I believe Common Cause's testimony through John Marion and I think Phil West was that if there is a problem, let the Ethics Commission deal with it separately by statute, not putting it in the Constitution. So that to me is the wiser idea, although I'm not in favor of any blackout period, even
You
by
know,
statute.
I am just hoping it comes through as a clean bill. Let the people decide whether they want us subject to it or not, and let the Ethics Commission handle the dangers
Yes. Well, you know.
internally. But we're going to have to take a break right now. We'll come right back.
Thank you.
The recent and hasty exit of Representative Ray Gallison from the legislative stage here in Rhode Island has shined a glaring light on the murky process of deciding on and then issuing legislative grants. It seems that everyone is now giving lip service to the need for reform, but no one is doing anything about it at all. Are you kidding me? I kid you not. Plenty of ink and electrons have been spilled since Gallison's departure. There have been wrist-wringing and the gnashing of teeth in all public pronouncements on the need for a major cleanup of the process by which tens of millions of deficit dollars are doled out to all those needy nonprofits. Even House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello has notoriously announced that he is carefully monitoring the testimony before House committees by potential recipients to determine whether or not such reform is needed. Well, monitor this, Nick. Last week, a subcommittee of the House Finance Committee convened to vet grant recipients in the human services sector. Presentations were made by some 60 organizations, all hoping for a piece of the $11.6 million in possible grants. Those presentations were made to just one person. That's right. Rep. Eileen Naughton was not only the subcommittee chair, but also its total bench strength. Not a single additional rep assigned to that subcommittee bothered to take his or her seats. Are you monitoring, Mr. Speaker? What message do you take from all those empty chairs? Here's what I get out of it. All this money has already been decided. For those in line to get some, it is in the bag. For those who are not, it doesn't really matter what they say in open testimony. Or, to put it another way, so I make myself absolutely clear to the Speaker, yes, we need some actual reform in the legislative grant process. Think we'll get any? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and my guest today is Nick Gorham, who is a former representative from Western Coventry, Foster, and Gloucester,
Yes.
and also has been really had a really good career at fighting for the things that are best for Rhode Islanders.
Well, thank you.
Yep, I know you were really there for regionalization. You tried very hard to bring the idea of consolidation forward. And of course, we have already talked about the separation of powers, but you've always been a champion of the things that are right for the people of the state. And I
thanks.
appreciate that very much.
Thanks. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it is what you're supposed to be doing. Just lately,
Yes.
because of my friend Chairman Gallison,
Yes.
a lot of attention has turned to the grant process
Yes.
of our government.
Yes.
There are two kinds of grants. One is legislative grants, which is money that comes from the Speaker and the Senate President.
Purely discretionary on the part of the Speaker and the President to distribute that money. There are no guidelines, no limits. They just give the money to whomever they want.
Yes, and I have taken some, I'll have to tell you. I haven't for 2 years, but good groups in my community asked for them. They do good work, and I started giving them. And then 2 years ago, I just stopped.
Yeah. Well, look, like every...
It's not fair. Why does one community get more than another? Why does one baseball team get more than another? Are the kids in Cranston worth more than the kids in Providence or Tiverton? It's just not fair on that level.
Right.
And then it's not transparent.
No, not
And
at
it's
all.
not accountable to
No.
taxpayers.
No, it is not. I, in the early part of my career, in the early 2000s, I took some legislative grants, and the caucus I was in, the Republican caucus, we agreed as a group we weren't going to do it anymore. There was no other way to make the point that this is just bad government.
It's bad government. It
And-
really is.
and-
And some people look at it as buying votes with other people's money.
Right.
Quite frankly.
I just
and
call them-
it should be stopped or really, really reformed so that there's no politics in it at all.
Well, I'm still convinced that the legislative grants that give all that discretion and power to the Speaker and President are unconstitutional. The Constitution requires any local or private appropriation has to be voted on by the House, no matter how small, no matter how trivial. If it's local or private, it has to be voted on by the entire House. And it has to be a 2/3 vote. Article 6, Section 11 of the
Yeah,
Constitution
it's part of the budget.
requires that. And it's in
But here-
essence ignored.
Once again, the Supreme Court kind of let us down on that one. You actually took a suit.
We brought a lawsuit, the Republican caucus did. We took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and we asked the Supreme Court to declare the scheme that the Speaker and Senate President had created that gave them all this discretion to distribute millions and millions of dollars of legislative grants any way they wanted. We asked the Supreme Court to declare that unconstitutional for a number of reasons. I won't get into all of them here. But we had good constitutional authority.
Yeah.
And I think that if we had gotten to the merits, we would have won. But the Supreme Court said, they're one of the only Supreme Courts in the country that's ever said this, taxpayers do not have standing to contest spending by government, even if it violates the Constitution. And that was a great disappointment to the entire
Yeah,
caucus.
so
But the
they
Supreme
didn't
Court,
rule on it, they just said
They-
you weren't allowed to question it.
they called it standing, which is a way that courts, I mean, many...
Sidestep it.
Well, you can say that. I'm not
All
going to
right,
say that.
I'll say it because I'm not a lawyer.
So,
They just didn't rule then.
They didn't rule on
They
it.
didn't look at any of the merits, they just said, no,
Nothing.
you don't have the right to bring this.
right.
Yeah.
right. So, the question is still out there. And you know what? It's too bad that they didn't decide it, and it's too bad that your complaints against Representative Gallison, creating legislative grants for himself and his so-called charitable foundation, too bad we couldn't have stopped it.
And we should be stopping it.
Yes. Look what happened.
It is other people's money, and we should be spending it wisely and be accountable to them.
Yes.
You know, the taxpayers, they just keep giving, right?
Yes.
And we act like it's our money to give, and that was one of the reasons I stepped back from it. It's wrong. I give my own money now.
Yes. You know, like.
Right, if I think it's a good charity, then I give my own money. I shouldn't be giving taxpayers' dollars.
Well, let's be fair, like many constitutionally mischievous things that government does, there is some virtue in the legislative grants because they give the money to some good organizations. But the problem is that you're going to see inevitably situations like Gallison, where you have representatives who are totally abusing the system to benefit themselves. And that could be prevented by requiring that it be voted upon in the budget, putting it in the budget, requiring that, and making legislators vote for specious grants like that are just going to create mischief and benefit people like Representative Gallison.
I honestly think it takes more than just being put in the budget, because sometimes those budgets are just passed through without people really going through all the line items.
Right.
You know, they'll put them in an article, and the people will say, well, inside this article is something really good for my community, so I'll vote for these legislative grants. I think the program needs to be taken out of politics. And yep, it still can be voted on as a line item.
Yes.
But where there cannot be, you know, the speaker or the Senate president saying, we'll give this one to you and we'll give this one to you and yours will be bigger than yours, and those kinds of things. It just should be out of politics.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it should.
It just should be. I've proposed this, I came up with what I thought was a solution. Nobody's coming up with others, and there needs to be a conversation around it. I'm not saying mine's the only solution, but we need to have a conversation about how do we get it out of politics if we want to keep them, or just abolish it altogether.
The way you get it out of politics, and you're trying to do it as many legislators before you tried to do it, take the grants out of politics, you have to take advantage of a situation that so acutely demonstrates that these grants are bad and they create mischief in government. They create perhaps even criminal conversion
Sure.
of government funds to benefit legislators. We don't know that yet, but it's looking like
It's looking bad.
it's looking bad in the Gallison case. I think the public awareness and the profile of the mischievousness of legislative grants is at an all-time high. And I hope that the General Assembly will do something about it. Speaker Mattiello says he has something coming out, but
There's not a lot of conversation about it. And so going from legislative grants, there's this thing called departmental or community service grants.
Yes.
They're one and the same thing.
Yes.
This is like a pool of money inside every department, Department of Education, Transportation, HHS, and they are just, without accountability, giving money out. And this is Gallison's money and Institute of Sports and all this. It needs really to be looked at.
Yes. Well, what we're learning, at least in the stories that I've recently read in the Providence Journal, is that these larger grants, these are like legislative grants on steroids. They're called community service grants. They're for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Big money.
They're given to large nonprofit charities to spend as they wish. And what we're learning is that they're using the money to lobby the General Assembly. And you know what lobbyists do with money that they get to...
They give to legislators.
They contribute it to legislators.
Yeah.
So this is just a bad system. It really needs
Bad
reform.
system, and it needs sunshine.
Yes.
And some real conversations around it.
Yes.
I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We're going to have to stop there, but maybe
been
we'll get it
brisk.
back to talk more about this. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
My wife and I have never taken a trip on a cruise ship. Millions of folks have gone to sea aboard countless numbers of cruise ships. Several of them have stopped over in Newport, so we have seen some of the big ships firsthand. Yet, we have never sailed away to the thrill of life on the ocean. Well, my wife makes the claim that since I spent a quarter of a century out on the deep blue sea in a U.S. Navy man-of-war, I have no need to see any more of the not always tranquil sea. Perhaps she is right, as in fact, I have steamed through most of the oceans of the world, having missed out on only one, Antarctica. Not sure what I really missed there. I was at a gathering of the Tin Can Sailors just this week and heard one of our members describe his experience on a destroyer that took a 51-degree roll as the seas tried to beat up his destroyer. He and his shipmates had the horror of wondering if they would make it upright again. They did, and it had a lasting effect on them all. Great sea stories that day as we recalled our lives at sea on the Greyhounds of the fleet. Now, we have our next bull session in August. Let me know if you want to attend. Great sea stories. Next meeting, I will ask all those sea salts how many actually have taken a cruise somewhere, or are they like me, been there, done that kind of guys. But recently, I read about the launching of the largest cruise ship ever built. The Harmony of the Seas has joined its sister ships Allure of the Sea and Oasis of the Sea, offering the cruising experience to literally thousands of passengers. Maximum 6,780 passengers, with 2,100 crew on that puppy. This newest of the US-based Royal Caribbean International Fleet is a mere 1,187.66 feet long and weighs in at 227,000 tons. This puppy is 18 decks tall, which 16 of them are devoted to guest staterooms. It is 217 feet wide. So actually, it is longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall. It is the most expensive cruise ship ever built, at a mere $1 billion. How can you make money with something this big? Well, seems that in 2011, $29.4 billion of tourism business went to cruising. Some 19 million passengers embarked that year. You can tell how successful a business is if you can find lots of companies selling tickets to whatever you offer. So I asked the American Discount Cruise, Cruise.com, Orbitz, Direct Line Cruises, Travelocity, and Expedia to give me data on a cruise to pick a place. They did that no problem, explaining that their services were better than calling the cruise ship direct or using your neighborhood travel agency. So I looked at what would happen to us if we booked a cruise somewhere. Gosh, it sounded like a combination of going to Disney World, Foxwoods, the Alps, or Hawaii. You can even bring the grandkids and expect them to remember you as the best grandpa of all time. So what can you do on the Harmony of the Sea that you can't do at home? Well, it goes like this. Remember that these ships have to attract a diversity of passengers. You can slide down a 10-story water slide or climb a rock wall or do a rope slide. There's a children's water park, a mini golf course, a surf simulator, floating jacuzzis, a casino to help you want to jump overboard. Oh, by the way, that does happen. Some 25 folks ended up overboard in 2009, most not recovered. But that's out of 22 million cruisers that year. That's about the odds of winning the lottery. Or you can go to a spa on the board or a fitness center. They have a 1,400-seat theater with Broadway shows. There are distinct neighborhoods aboard the Harmony. Love that name. You can visit the boardwalk, the Royal Promenade, entertainment place, the pool, oh, there's 23 of those, or a sports zone. The park on board has 12,000 plant species, all living the good life. Plenty of water and good sun. Of course, you can be invaded by a neurovirus while cruising the world. You know, one of those gastroenteritis dudes that make life less than comfortable. But in truth, your odds for that are less than 1% on a 7-day cruise. It is true that 200 people pass away every year on cruise ships. So they have to have doctors and morgues. Again, small numbers. I personally do not think a 70-year-old should go down a 10-story water slide unless your granddaughter dares you to do it. So I have not booked a cruise yet and don't know if I ever will. Lately, the trend is all-inclusiveness, meaning some of these ships let you drink anything for free all day long. That on top of the normal eat anything you want all day long. Okay. But luckily, some ships also offer AA meetings, Gamblers Anonymous, and Weight Watchers gatherings to keep things on an even keel. Thank you for watching, and God bless.
Thank you.